voters.
Losing the reddest of red state, absolutely devastating.
Now the Democrats are winning.
A major win for the Democrats.
This is what a wave feels like.
That blue wave keeps crashing.
In Illinois, Kansas, New Mexico, and Michigan.
Wow.
Wow. Hello, Minnesota.
Hello, North Carolina.
Voters in Kentucky sent a message loud and clear.
I will be serving in the high honor as governor.
Your governor.
Governor of the great state of New Jersey.
New York, Wisconsin.
Pennsylvania.
Colorado.
Nevada.
Great state of Oregon.
The Democrats are winning bigly, winning bigly.
There is nothing we can't do in this state. Absolutely nothing.
You may even get tired of winning.
Whitmer hit the ground running.
Governor Evers' first day on the job, he's getting to
Single
work.
largest investment in education in New Mexico's history.
We're going to get him a raise.
$126 million for education.
Free college tuition programs.
Executive order to expand Medicaid.
Battling the opioid epidemic.
Today, the governor will sign new climate change bills.
Build a clean energy economy.
Usher in new renewable energy.
512,000 green tech jobs.
We had historic turnout using vote by mail.
Winning.
Want to see a wave? There was a blue wave.
Blue wave.
The scale of the victory the Democrats just won.
Democrats on their way to a very big night.
What an incredible night.
We're going to get to work.
This is a new day.
This is what a wave feels like.
We'll keep winning
And fighting for progress.
So join us.
By texting winning to 30201.
And help us win some more. Democrats win.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy here, and welcome and thank you so much for joining us for our second Democratic Governors Association panel, and I'm proud and honored to serve as the chair of the Democratic Governors Association. So roll the tape back to 2016. A lot of pundits and press alike worried aloud that Democrats had lost touch with Americans, that the states we used to securely hold, places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, to pick three, that they were gone for good. Could we ever win them back? Folks wondered. Well, the Democratic Governors Association took up that challenge and delivered a resounding, yes, we can. Throughout 2017, 2018, and 2019, Democratic governors not only won big in purple states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, but they also won in ruby red states like Kansas, like Kentucky, like Louisiana. Since Donald Trump's inauguration, Democratic governors have won in 6 states that Donald Trump carried in 2016. And why? They won because they campaigned on the priorities that matter to voters: healthcare, education, and jobs. And now that they're in office, they're fighting for these same values. I am so honored to be introducing today's panel that includes some of these incredible leaders. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers, all of whom were elected in 2018 and in 2019 in those blue waves, and they're showing what true leadership looks like in both red and purple states. Today's conversation could not have a better moderator. It is moderated by Fair Fight founder and one of my heroes, former gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams. And the discussion will focus on what this work looks like in today's political landscape. Today, because of the work of the Democratic Governors Association, 24 states and the majority of Americans are governed by a Democrat. But we can't stop there. We have critical races in North Carolina, in Montana, Missouri, New Hampshire, to name just a few. And we need you by our side to add even more states to our list. So if you want to help, if you can help, and by the way, we need you to help, please text us winning in all caps to 30201. That's winning all caps to 30201 and help us win some more. Or you can visit demgovswin.com. Again, the website, demgovswin.com. Either way, you've been with us. We need you to stay with us. We'll continue to make a difference in blue states, purple states, and red states alike. With that, please help me welcome, again, the Fair Fight founder and an American hero, former Democratic candidate, and a dear friend, Stacey Abrams.
Thank you so much, Governor Murphy, for such a kind introduction and for convening this extraordinary panel. My name is Stacey Abrams, and I served as the Democratic leader in the Georgia House of Representatives for 7 years. I served in the legislature for 11 years, and I had the honor of serving as the Democratic nominee for governor for Georgia in 2018. I am more excited, though, to be in the presence of folks who crossed that finish line and are leading their states so ably. I want to begin by introducing my friend, my former co-leader, Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. I want to say hello to Governor Evers of my former home state where I was born, the state of Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers. My sister teaches in Kentucky, and so I had a heart for Governor Andy Beshear and just so proud of the work that he's doing for the South. And of course, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, who has been doing such extraordinary work leading that state through a very difficult time. So I'm going to just kick us off. I wanted to begin actually with you, Governor Whitmer. We know that you serve in a moment of challenge and that you have been, unfortunately, because of the Trump administration, you have been put front and center as one of the faces of how we deal with divided government, not only in COVID, but just writ large, how you have to navigate leading your state. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing and what it means to lead in a divided moment?
Yeah, well, thanks, Stacey. And, I am such a fan of yours. And I think the whole world has seen what a difference Democratic leadership makes. And if the good people of Georgia had had Governor Abrams, Georgia would be in a much stronger position with regard to COVID and everything else that we're all confronting. So I'm really glad to be here with you in particular today. But of course, my fellow Democratic governors who have become such important sources of support while we're navigating the unfathomable. I can tell you this, and I don't often speak on behalf of my fellow governors, but I think I'm solid when I say none of us ever imagined we'd be in circumstances like these. I can also tell you that with a Republican-led legislature in Michigan, up until Donald Trump set his sights on me, we had good bipartisan work that was being done. But once the president started attacking me at his press conferences or via Twitter, the whole tone changed. And once they made this public health crisis political, it got a lot more dangerous and a lot more deadly. And frankly, it's going to cost our economy a lot more because of it. As soon as that happened, my legislature stopped extending my state of emergency. As soon as that happened, I had people who were armed with AR-15s showing up on the Capitol, which people saw pictures of that around the country, but also here at my house, the governor's residence. As soon as that happened, there was an effort underway in the legislature to impeach me, to take away my powers. Right now they're collecting signatures with the ballot initiative. And I think it's the politicization of this public health crisis that has so undermined our efforts to get our arms around it. And that's why this nation, as the strongest country in the world, is faltering so badly with this pandemic, and the economic consequences are going to be so much bigger. And of course, most importantly, the loss of life, because we have an administration in Washington, D.C. that has politicized it and that won't make decisions based on science. We've not been bullied. I can also, I think, speak for my fellow governors on this call. We've not been bullied into making decisions that we knew were going to be harmful to our residents. And I think that's why it was so important that we came together and supported one another. So, for instance, Andy Beshear, we've adopted him in the Midwest and pulled him into our Great Lakes governors group of Republican and Democratic governors who've been sharing information, lending support, and I have found that to be really important in this moment. And I just want to say, I got to give my Great Lakes governors a little tease here. I'm wearing a t-shirt that says 4 out of 5 Great Lakes prefer Michigan. I love my fellow Democratic governors in the Midwest. But anyway, I just share all of that because I think that this administration's incompetence has made our outcomes so much worse, but it was enormously increased by the fact that they've made it political too.
Well, Governor Evers, you are the poster child right now for what's happening between COVID and elections. And I want to just point out that we were including and we were expecting to see Governor John Bel Edwards, who unfortunately was unable to be with us because he is in the midst of a lawsuit against him personally for mandating masks in Louisiana. And where you are in Wisconsin, we watched with just sheer horror what occurred during that period when you were attempting to do your job, maintain democracy, and support your communities against COVID-19. Your issues went all the way to the Supreme Court. And yet you've served for the last 2 years really focusing on your priorities for Wisconsin. Thinking about the combination of COVID and voting, talk a little bit about how you are navigating leading a state that is politically divided but has such clear priorities and clear needs.
Yeah, and thanks for your good work, Stacey. This is it's always fun being with like thinking people. I started out my term in office before I took over. Frankly, the legislature came in and did pass several lame duck session. Took away several really important authorities that the governor and frankly even more so the attorney general had, and it just has continued on to this day, and it was especially raw during the April election, which is a general election in our state, and we tried to move it and it didn't happen, and none of that frankly surprised me. Nor did it surprise me that the Supreme Court did what they did and essentially made the election a dangerous one. But at the end of the day, there was some bright lights there. First of all, we had a large turnout. Second of all, we went previous to that election, the most absentee ballot or mail-in ballot, depending on what term you want to use, was 40,000, and that could have been in a presidential election, frankly. We had 1.2 million people vote by mail. Almost 70% of the turnout was by mail. And so that set the stage, frankly, for the future. In addition, a little known but very progressive and really smart woman took out a really bad man on his Supreme Court, which took away probably the most conservative vote on the Supreme Court. So there was a good result out of that really horrible situation. But the context in Wisconsin is to mess with beavers any chance you can get. And frankly, I don't respond every time. I stick up for my principles, but to me, overreacting in situations like that, and I'm not saying any of my colleagues do that, they do the same thing I do. You just got to keep on keeping on. And in Wisconsin, what I ran on is what we continue to work on. The issue around healthcare, issue around infrastructure, our roads, our internet, and of course education. And I know that's part of our conversation today, but you got to keep going back to the basics, and that's one of the way you kind of get through this and frankly stay above the fray as much as possible.
Well, Governor Walz, you had the privilege of following a Democratic governor, but you lead a state that actually had one of the closest margins of victory in the national level in 2016. And in 2018, your state continued to move forward. But you still have to grapple with the extreme polarization that we see in our national politics. Can you talk a bit about how your priorities have shifted, or if they have, as you've navigated leading a state that, while still blue, continues to have to manage against a red sea of challenges?
Well, thank you, Stacey. And again, I would want to thank you for your work on protection of the ballot. A lot of us sleep better at night knowing you're out there doing that work. And to my fellow governors, these are folks that have become more than just peers or colleagues. They have become the touchstone that we talk back and forth to know know those things that we share that you have to get done. I think what's encouraging about this group, and I think it segues into the answer to your question, is people want results, and we have to get results. I got asked a question the other day about, are we worried about the upcoming election or whatever? And I said, governors are worried about the next COVID numbers. I'm worried to make sure that justice is served in the death of George Floyd. Those are the types of things that we're focusing on. And I think Minnesota has become a microcosm. We're incredibly proud that we have the longest streak of voting for a Democratic presidential candidate of any state in the nation, dating back 50 years. But we're also very divided. I represented a congressional district for 12 years that I was the second Democrat in 110 years to represent that. And it is a designed effort to divide us as a nation. And it breaks along urban-rural lines. And I come from what we call Greater Minnesota, a community out in farm country down near the Iowa border. And there has been a concerted effort to try and define us that way. We rejected that. I ran along with Peggy Flanagan, the first Anishinaabe Indigenous woman ever to be elected to a executive office. And we ran on the idea of one Minnesota. We're in it together and finding ways to get things done. We disagree often, but we're able to get a budget done. We disagree after George Floyd, but we did move some reforms. I think that desire to get things done, though, is with this administration becoming harder and harder. You see people like Gretchen Whitmer doing the hard work and then being attacked for simply doing the right thing. And that's very discouraging to many of us. I started using a line, and people know that I'll work across party lines, but I talk to folks too, is I don't want our kindness to be mistaken for weakness. We have a responsibility to deliver results, protect the ballot box, follow science, create jobs, and make sure things like equity and inclusion are at the center of how we're deciding to get things done. So for me, it's a divided legislature. It's a divided state. It's a purple state, but I think it's one that there's a lot of elements coming together right now, whether it be handling COVID-19 or whether it be justice after George Floyd, which was, of course, simply the spark of a 500-year powder keg that was ready to go. And Minnesota was not all that different than other states, and we had to reflect and look at ourselves. I think the challenge will be here is breaking out of some of these just ridiculously rigid, I mean, the mask mandate is one. I mean, the things that Tony Evers is doing, amazing things. It is true, watching Wisconsin do so many good things, watching them keep their death rates low against all odds, because they fight back against him. Imagine if he had a legislature that was working with him. I think a lot of the upper Midwestern states, Governor Beshears, Governor Whitmer, Governor DeWine across the aisle are trying to do these things that we get pushed back against. So I think that idea of uniting the country, the idea that we're not red and blue states, we're the United States, the idea that we're Minnesota, we have to work for that. But don't for a minute think at times that we can compromise on our values, that we're willing to say we're going to give up on a few people to make this deal. I think now is not the time for that.
Thank you. Well, Governor Beshear, I know that they've adopted you in the Great Lakes, but down here in the South, we count you among us as well, along with Governor Cooper and Governor Bell Edwards. You are a critical part of showing what the South can do in response to COVID. But you've also been grappling, much like Governor Walz, you've been grappling with the racial reckoning, particularly because of Breonna Taylor. Can you talk a bit about how you navigate the local and state issues, particularly from your position as a governor who has been very forthright about the rights of people in your community and what it means to be a Democratic governor in this moment?
Well, thank you, Stacey, for all your work, and thank you for your help in my election. And when you win by the margin that I did, what everybody out there did was absolutely necessary. And to my colleagues on here, I know I'm the new guy, but you got to tell me if I'm allowed to wear a T-shirt. So maybe it'll look a little different the next
You're
time.
a governor, Andy. Wear whatever you want.
There you go. There you go. In Kentucky, we are experiencing these two crises at the same time. Our COVID crisis, where we are fighting for the lives, the health of our people, our economy, the education of our kids, and at the same time, 400 plus years of fatigue, of a need for racial justice, of systematic racism that pervades every part of our society. And navigating both at this time and where we are is and can be complex, but doing the right thing is always supposed to be hard. My faith teaches me that, and knows that's a lesson that I've got to repeat to myself a bunch right now. I think they say that in times of crisis, you see true character. And so I think we've seen some very good character, and then we've seen sometimes a lack of it as well. And when we look at where we are as a country, I'm not sure anymore that polarization is the right word, because that suggests that people have these deeply held views on this or on that, and that they are just very different. I think where we are now is this really destructive us versus them mentality, where some people are deciding their view on an issue based on what someone else thinks. And if they're for it, you're against it, or vice versa. And I think it's this defining yourself as being against somebody else. And then that level of acrimony, the names that you'll throw out, and saying all this in front of our children, which we're trying to teach to be better, is a real challenge. And I know right now, as governors, it's hard, because while you know that the vast majority of the people in either your Commonwealth or your state are behind you, we're shut in just like everybody else, not traveling as much, and the noise that's out there can get really loud. But I think that in times like this, what we've seen out of our Democratic governors and out of a number of our colleagues on the other side is just rising above the politics. I mean, decisions that I've got to make and that all these governors make are about life or death, or about a better life with true opportunity, and finally starting to address the lack of opportunity to so many of our people out there. And so it's just that time where you got to do the right thing because it's the right thing, and be able to sleep at least a little better at night, but because of it. I know in Kentucky, we see disparities, and especially racial disparities at a time of COVID, that it just truly lays bare that inequality in healthcare that Dr. King talked about. We're losing Black and African American Kentuckians at twice the rate to COVID deaths as they make up of our population. And so for us, we're trying to live out our values that healthcare is a human right, that everybody deserves healthcare, but we're making a priority based on the fact that our disadvantaged communities haven't been prioritized enough, but also based on the impact of COVID, and starting our attempts to sign up every single Kentuckian for some form of coverage in our Black and African American communities. So it's a challenging time in the United States, but maybe if we step up and we do the right things, the people will notice. And if that just means that half, maybe more, of those falling in, whatever we call it, polarization, come back and start talking to each other, then maybe all this challenge will have been worth it.
Thank you. And you raised the issue of healthcare, and I want to take this actually back to Governor Walz to start. Can you talk a bit about how the issue of healthcare plays differently at the state level than it does at the national level, and how you've been addressing it? I'm actually going to ask this question of the other two governors as well. I'll start with you, Governor Walz.
Yeah, well, first of all, I had the privilege to be in Congress in 2010 when we passed the ACA, and understood exactly what that did about breaking down barriers, about adding access. Minnesota, like many other states, has a fine healthcare delivery system, or hospitals, if you want to call it that, but the access to it is very difficult. And what we knew is that at the state level, we were still seeing those social determinants of health pre-COVID-19, and now they've just simply been exacerbated, which we know Black and communities of color are having higher positivity rates, higher death rates, much more impact health-wise and economic-wise. The one thing is, at the state level, we're able to pass what we have a healthcare access fund, a provider tax that we have 1.8% on, that allows us to provide Minnesota care. It was a precursor to its we have the highest insured rate in the country, but it's hard to hold on to that. It's hard to maintain that because we're getting very little help. So the states do have the capacity, whether it's Medicaid expansion that we use using federal help. We use the state provider tax to try and fill that end gap. But I think the governors certainly know this, and everyone knows, we're driven by federal policy around Medicare, around the VA system. And COVID, once again, has highlighted this. I mean, it is stunning to me that the administration is continuing their lawsuit against the ACA in the middle of a global pandemic that is already having huge impacts, and the number of people that could be left off is dramatic. So I just think one of the things I'm talking about and have talked about since I've been in office, we need to expand our Minnesota Care to a true public option that's offered to everyone, and to make sure that if the federal government can't do it, it's going to be very difficult state by state, but we need to do that. And I think maybe these governors on the call, that Great Lakes Compact type of thing is, I don't necessarily think it's the best way to do things, but in our, I think Andy described this right. I think he's right. It's not just polarization. It's just a blind adherence to your home team or whatever you would be. It's like Packer fans, no matter what you tell them, they stick there. And so I think, and what I would tell them, and I tell Tony this, I think we have to start thinking regionally more. And we do a good job of that. I think you're seeing it in this Great Lakes, and it is bipartisan, trying to deliver, because I think many of you on this, listening today recognize is, once we come through COVID-19, the underlying problems and those that have been exposed more are not going away. Our healthcare crisis is still there. And while the ACA was a wonderful thing, it wasn't far enough. The health disparities are absolutely criminal. The idea that in Minneapolis, if I go in and I go into that hospital and there's two babies laying there, one black and one white, I can tell you with almost great certainty which one's going to live longer, which one's going to develop chronic issues. And in the age of COVID, I can tell you what percentage is going to be infected with COVID. So states have a great capacity to do this, but it's still going to take federal action.
Governor Whitmer?
Yeah, I was just going to say, add to Tim's observation that it is just, it's just cruel and should be criminal that they are trying to take away healthcare in the midst of a global pandemic. And also I would just observe that the rhetoric that they're going to all of a sudden come up with a protection for people with pre-existing conditions is mind-boggling, because that's precisely what the Affordable Care Act has done, and that they're continuing to challenge in court. And so I do agree with Tim's assessment that there's a lot that the states can do, but ultimately to broaden access, we need a national plan. I thought I saw a cartoon early on during COVID, our experience with COVID, and it was me and Mike DeWine in the cartoon, and one of us said to the other, "Hey, maybe we should start a country," because the states have been pitted against one another in COVID-19. One of the most stunning moments throughout the last 6 months, and there have been a lot, but one of the ones that will always stay with me is when we, the nation's governors, were on a call with the White House. And this is Republican and Democratic governors together. Michigan was heating up. Detroit was heating up very early, as was New York and New Orleans, and obviously the state of Washington. And on that call, they essentially said, "You're on your own." And we were going into a weekend where we had one shift worth of masks for our nurses and doctors. One shift worth, not one day, but one shift worth. And they said, "You're on your own. We're not the nation's shipping clerk." And it was in that moment that I realized we have to build up a global procurement office. And so I think that if we had a national strategy around COVID, if we had a national strategy around broadening access to healthcare and addressing disparate outcomes for people of color, we could make an incredible difference. And yet right now it's piecemeal. It's 50 states with 50 different policies. Some don't have any policies. And this is a virus that doesn't care what state you're in, where your state line is, or your party line. And that's precisely why a national strategy, accurate information, using the DPA, not just for food, but for swabs and for N95 masks. All of these are aspects that I think are going to be so important. We expanded Medicaid in Michigan. I'm grateful. My predecessor did that. The Republican governor, I was in the state Senate. I was a leader. We worked together and did it. And 750,000 people in Michigan have healthcare because of it. But there are still a lot of people who don't. And that's precisely why we all have to be focused on how do we expand. So in Michigan, we've done a number of policy changes to expand eligibility and access. But there's much more work to do, and I know that's across the country.
Governor Evers?
Well, I think I'm the only governor here of a state that has not expanded Medicaid, which is just a horrible situation for us. We would be able to provide much better health care for 90,000 people. I think it's even a little higher now than exists now. And to be honest with you, it's all about power. I can talk to any number of Republican legislators, and it's like, yeah, we're with you, but the leaders aren't, and that's why we haven't. To some extent, we were able to parlay that during the last budget to get some other healthcare money that we may not have gotten, but Medicaid expansion still is a top priority. In Wisconsin, the pandemic, as I think it probably elsewhere, has laid bare the disproportionality of healthcare outcomes in our state and in our nation, and we have a difficult time dealing with that without Medicaid expansion. But again, I just want to double down on what Gretchen said about the national government. We need healthcare policy, robust healthcare policy from the federal level. Donald Trump would have taken over the issue of testing and getting equipment, protective equipment. We would have saved thousands of lives in our state and our nation. We would not be in this situation in Wisconsin where we vacillate between 2% and 10% positivity day by day. And we would have some structure and opportunities for people that just frankly don't exist now. So we continue to fight those issues. We compete against the three governors here for equipment. We compete against them for testing supplies, and as a result, all four of us struggle, and it makes no sense. And I just feel so sad for the people of our country because they're all suffering because of a lack of leadership in Washington, D.C. So I will continue to fight for Medicaid expansion. I always use Republican states as an example whenever I talk about it. Now I've got Missouri jumping ship and actually getting on that bandwagon. We'll get there sooner or later. People will start to lose their jobs on the Republican side because the people of Wisconsin expect it. It polls like 70 to 80% every time somebody polls on this issue. And so we will continue to hold people's feet to the fire and eventually get to a place where healthcare is a top priority in Wisconsin.
And Tony's people in Wisconsin deserve this. I can tell you in Kentucky, our people need to be healthier. We're number 1, 2, or 3 in heart disease, lung cancer, and diabetes in the country, year in and year out. But we have one of the lowest death rates per capita from COVID, and the answer is really simple. We were one of the first states to expand Medicaid, and it has saved lives during this epidemic. It was expanded by my second favorite governor in Kentucky's history, who happens to be my dad. But let me tell you, it is working here in Kentucky. And this challenge to the ACA, it threatens to not only remove coverage for pre-existing conditions, but also eliminate expanded Medicaid, which would crush every rural hospital, but it would also prevent people from getting services where they live. For us, it means people in Appalachia might have to drive 3 hours just to see a doctor. It would be absolutely disastrous. So healthcare is critically important right now in this country, and making sure that while there needs to be updates to the Affordable Care Act, it and expanded Medicaid are the difference between life and death right now for so many people across the country.
Well, speaking as someone who lives in a state that is unfortunately in this moment more aligned with the poor decisions of Governor Evers' predecessor and not following the extraordinary example that you've set, Governor Beshear, in saving and preserving Medicaid expansion, I do want to talk for a moment about the unifying issues. We've talked about healthcare, but what do you all see as unifying issues that helped you bring together your states despite the tribalism, the polarization, and we have to admit it, the misinformation about what is versus what is being whispered about. What has helped you all really navigate, and not just in the moment of COVID, but in the moment before it, and what do you see happening after it that's going to continue to unify you? And I'm going to start with you, Governor Whitmer.
So, we've had a wild year and a half, right? So we've all been in office for 20 months. And it has been, there have been some wonderful moments where we were able to do some good work around bringing down auto insurance rates in Michigan. We've done a lot around criminal justice reform in Michigan, which I'm really proud of. I think there's more that we can do, and I have indications from the other side of the aisle in the legislature that they're interested in doing that. So those are things that I think are important. I had a real hope that we would get to work on infrastructure. I ran on fixing the dam roads, and I know across the country, everyone wants to fix the dam roads. And because the federal government has not been able to get an infrastructure package done, we're moving forward, not on the original proposal I put on the table in my first year, but we're moving forward with a bond so that we can get to work repairing the state roads. But, there are the fundamentals, as Tony was saying, that make a difference for everyone. And when the roads are falling apart, or the water is undrinkable, or the education system isn't supported and getting kids to a place where they're competitive, every one of us pays. But the people that pay the most are the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. If your rim is busted because you hit a pothole, that can be a month's rent. If your child is crammed in a classroom, not right now, but in a classroom where they're not getting enough attention, for some people they can hire a tutor. For others, their child is going to fall further behind. And if you can't drink the water coming out of your tap, some rich folks can go buy water, but for people that struggle, that's just not, you're stuck. And so that's why getting the fundamentals right is what puts I think our states and our nation in a stronger position economically. But more importantly, is what puts individuals on a path to where they can live the American dream, right? A good life where you can take care of your family. But all of this, of course, there's the racial overlay as well that I think should be a part of every piece of our agendas. I know that it is for us here on this call, but it should be for all of us. I think that's part of why acknowledging the disparate impact of COVID. I was really proud Michigan was one of the first 3 states to do that. And we did it because my chief medical executive is a Black woman who is an ER doc. And she was one of the first people to see it. She said, we got to start educating people. We got to get this out there. And we got to have this drive and agenda. And that's what we're doing.
Well, Governor Walz, what can a Biden administration learn from how you've navigated divided government in your state?
Yeah, I would agree. I think listening to each of these governors, there's a reason why they're leading with such dignity, clarity, and results. I think it's setting that vision that people want. There is no way that the majority of Americans want this drama, want this crisis, and want this division. And I think going back to Gretchen's point about sticking to the fundamentals, and one of the fundamentals is everybody wants that better future for their children. Everybody, I think, wants to leave something that they can be proud of. And I think it's going back to finding those sweet spots. For example, around climate change. As again, I said, I represented one of the largest agricultural districts, number 2 in pork production, number 2 in turkeys, all of those things that you would think are associated with rural America, and that there might not be that emphasis. These are people that are deeply connected to their land, deeply concerned about sustainability. So when I first went to Congress and started talking about addressing climate change, while yes, it's an existential threat, was also an incredible economic driver and a legacy issue for our children. And that we became a leader in wind power and in some of the innovations. And so I think what the Biden administration can do is don't assume that this is an unbridgeable gap. Don't assume, and be smart about how we message this. Bring folks back in, and don't sell climate change on shaming people who throw away a plastic bottle. Frame climate change around that it is, yes, the right thing to do. Yes, we do need to make an impact, but there are economic and starting to understand that when we make these changes, this gives us a fresh start to tackle that equity issue Gretchen Shin's talking about. I think people are starting to grasp that. I think the Biden administration should recognize there is a lot of people of goodwill out there, and to find those unifying factors, but lean into things. Climate change is a winner. Racial equity issues and addressing systemic racism is a winner, not just in our cities, but across, I would say, across greater America.
Governor Evers and Governor Beshear, can you all talk about how the Democratic Party can do a better job of turning out that cross-section of voters, not just the voters that we consider our base, or not the voters we consider, Trump voters, but how do we turn out non-voting folks, people who are low propensity, who just don't think that this is for them? Both of you had races where, in your case, Governor Evers, you won in a way that surprised folks who'd gone through through a recall election and 2 elections. And Governor Beshear, you won by a thin but mighty margin. Can you talk about how you built cross sections of voters in a time where people didn't think it was possible or didn't know how to do it, and what we should bring with us into 2020?
Yeah, and I'll be somewhat repetitive here. I just think focusing on the basics is how that happens. Republican moms and dads want good education, and frankly, I would encourage our ticket at the national level. Education can be an issue for presidential race. I really do believe that, and I would hope that there's good polling on that too. So hopefully people would consider that. But basics around roads, infrastructure, making sure rural Wisconsin has the best broadband possible. We've worked on that in Wisconsin. It's one of the few things that Republicans and Democrats agree on. And so I think the basic issues are really, really important. But I'd also say that issues that arose out of George Floyd's murder really impacted me directly. But our state, clearly in Madison and Milwaukee, there was an outcry. But hell, I'll tell you, all across the state in tiny little town of Plymouth, Wisconsin, where I grew up and my wife grew up, they have never voted for me and never will vote for me. Not because they're not my friends, it's because they're Republicans. But at the end of the day, they had 2 protests around George Floyd in Plymouth, Wisconsin, Kiel, Wisconsin, Rhinelander, Wisconsin, where, frankly, a lot of these places are lucky if there's half a dozen people of color living there. And so I think that resonates, and the disproportionate outcomes for people of color and people that are struggling economically, even though that seems like democratic stuff, I don't think so anymore. And I think the basics have expanded to include those issues.
I think it starts with the issues, education, healthcare, opportunity, things that every family cares about, even more so the things that they may struggle with. To be focused on that family that's sitting around their table at the end of the night, they've just gotten their kids in bed. I have a 10 and 11-year-old. That moment you have your kids in bed is a big moment. But what are they worried about for that next day or that next month? And I think being right there isn't just the place that you should be to appeal to voters. I think it's the right place to be to help us move ahead as a state and as a country. But I also think we've got to get back to talking about the why. Why are you running? What truly matters to you? What drives you? What are your values? And to be able to talk about faith, if that is, if you are a person of faith, but why it drives you, where you're going. And we see so much right now because of the rise of probably cable news, of the transactional piece, of Washington being blatant horse trading at a time of crisis, of an international pandemic, where we can't just say, let's do the right thing for our people's survival, but instead it's what can I get for fights we've been having for a long time. I think people truly want to see that you care. And that's why you're doing it, because nobody's going to agree with the decisions you make all the time. Actually, everyone on this call right now dealing with COVID understands that. You know, I'm a pro-education governor that had to ask schools to shut down in March and is trying to be real careful about how we reopen them. But I think if people know that you care, they understand that while they may disagree with decisions that you make, you're trying to do the best you can. You're trying to do the right thing, and you're trying to do it from a position of caring. I think people desperately need that right now. And it's not just Democrats versus Republicans, or this is how I get this many votes and that many votes. I just think that we're at a point where the true, genuine nature of the why is what so many people are hungry for.
Well, I'm going to take moderator's prerogative to ask this last question before we wrap up. And that is, you know, I've had the privilege of visiting your states, every single one of them, either pre-COVID or, you know, at some point. And we are privileged that Fair Fight has been able to work in your states, working particularly with your offices and with your parties to build infrastructure for this upcoming election. We are hearing a lot about the work that's being done, unfortunately, by the GOP to undermine our elections, to erode not only the infrastructure, but also our confidence. And one mission that I have is to let people know now is not the time to panic. Now is the time to make a plan, that we've got toolboxes for how our democracy can work, even when things are breaking. And we need people to know to use that toolbox. And so I'm going to ask each of you to give me your 30-second pitch to your constituents about what making a plan looks like in your state. And Governor Evers, because you've been thinking about this a lot, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for your good work, Stacey. In this issue, my pitch is, to the people of Wisconsin is this: we faced disaster last April. It was, in setting of the politics aside, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we had an election, an important election, a general election. Yes, there was a presidential primary, but there was a huge Supreme Court race going on at the same time, and we persevered because we have embraced, frankly, mail balloting. As I said before, we went from a top of 40,000 in the past to 1.2 million. I think we'll be doubling that this time. We'll have over 2 million mail-in ballots. And if people are concerned about the election, that's the option. And they should be doing it. They should be getting ready to do that now. In turn, at the local level, we're very localized on elections, but we used the National Guard in a real significant way last time, and we're going to do it again this time. We are going to have enough poll workers in every precinct. The number of polls that are going to be open in our urban areas, Milwaukee had 5 this last time. It's in the hundreds this next time. So voting is not only a privilege, but it is something that is so god-awful important this time. And I'm encouraging people to do it by mail, but also if you feel that you want to do it in person, you will be able to do it in person safely. There's no more important election in our lifetime than this one in November.
Governor Whitmer?
I'd just say, if you haven't already ordered your absentee ballot, you can do so starting August 20th. You can just go online. It's very easy. I ordered both my primary ballot and my general election back months ago. So for the general election, you can go online soon and get that ordered, and please do. The more people that vote comfortably, safely from home, the better. Your voice is important. And if you're not able to do that, need to go in person, you will still have a polling place. But as I say to every Michigander all the time, mask up, no matter which way you're voting. If you're out in public and you're getting around people, make sure you wear your mask. It's a sign of intelligence and strength.
Governor Beshear?
Well, thanks to a bipartisan agreement between myself, a Democratic governor, and our Republican Secretary of State, we have more ways to vote in this upcoming election than ever before. So there's no excuse. This is the bedrock of our democracy, and it's time for everybody to make their vote heard, their voice heard, and their vote count. And thanks to a restoration of voting rights that I was able to do under an executive order, we've got hundreds of thousands of people that haven't been able to vote recently that are going to be able to vote now. So if you're scared about COVID, order your absentee ballot. If you want to vote in person, there's going to be multiple weeks of early voting. If you want to vote on Election Day itself, just make sure that you figure out the time you're going to go and when so you can be spaced out. And Governor Whitmer said it just right. Wear your mask. It's the smart thing. It's the right thing. It protects other people, and it's required in Kentucky.
And Governor Walz.
Well, I'll agree with everything they said. I'll throw down a bit of a gauntlet as I normally do on these things. Minnesota always ranks first in the nation in voter turnout. We've had no excuse absentee ballot longer than anyone else. We retained our crown in 2018. We slipped to second in 2016, and that made our state competitive. So what we know is when you vote, you get the results that the people want. And this access to the ballot that Stacey is promoting, that these governors are talking about, I would challenge each of these governors. Let's see who gets the highest voter turnout. Let's get everybody to vote this year.
It's on. It's on.
Well, I'm going to add one more challenge to you all, and I know this is more of a screed than it is a question. We also know that while we're doing a redo of 2016, we're also watching the 2010 election occur. And that means that this is one of those 20-year experiences where we have a census year that occurs with a presidential year. And unfortunately, we're watching the Trump administration weaponize and try to artificially truncate the census. And a lot of our communities don't understand that this is a 10-year power grab. And that particularly in Wisconsin and in Minnesota and in Michigan, absolutely, we know that the legislature has been jerry-rigged. They like to call it gerrymandered, but I think it's been rigged based on what happened in 2010 and what's facing us in 2020 with the artificial truncation of the census on September 30th, with the slow release of the non-response follow-up when the enumerators knock on your doors, all of those things that are happening. And unfortunately for Governor Beshear and for those of you who have large rural, in fact, all of you have large rural tracts, we know that the undercount in those rural communities is going to not only affect this year, but it's going to affect COVID recovery dollars and long-term planning. And so I'm going to give you guys each a minute to wrap up, but would love for you to talk a little bit in your closing about the census and what it means for your state. Because as Democratic governors, you understand what happens when the census isn't accurate. And so I'm going to start with you, Governor Whitmer.
All right. So everyone's got to get counted. It is crucial. The sad irony is in the midst of this global pandemic, it's harder to count, and yet it's more important than ever that we get counted. Dollars that come into the state, whether it is about fixing our dam roads, or it is about expanding access to health care, or it is about food insecurity, or affordable housing, or Social Security, all of these numbers impact the dollars that flow into Michigan. We need to get our fair share, and that means every one of us needs to get counted. So get counted, make your plan to vote, and mask up.
Governor Evers.
Census is huge in Wisconsin. People need to sign up, get their information to the federal government. We are the most gerrymandered state in the country. And as soon as that census data comes to Wisconsin, I will be, the Republicans in Wisconsin, the legislature creates the new maps, and I think they'll come up with even worse gerrymandered maps than they have in the past. And I will veto that. And if in this next election, this next November, in the down ballot, if we lose just a handful of seats, namely 6, my veto will mean nothing. And so we will be actively working on that going forward, and spending all my time raising money to support those folks. Because if that's the case, they'll override my veto, and we'll have 10 more years of the worst rigged maps in the state of Wisconsin. So this is a critical time to get the census right, but it's also a critical time to make sure that the when they draw the lines in Wisconsin again, that they are fair.
Governor Beshear.
Now, filling out your census is your duty as a patriotic American. It's certainly your duty as a Kentuckian. And if we want to live up to the values that we claim, protecting our children, protecting our seniors, giving true opportunity to those that may be born in difficult circumstances, filling out your census is the shortest, easiest thing you can do to help make sure that there are federal dollars for those programs that are supposed to help us to live up to those values. But I'd also just say in closing, we talk a lot about polarizations, the name calling, and the rest out there. And we talk about a lot of it as just happening in America, but it's also on each individual one of us. We're living through a difficult time filled with anxiety and fear and concern, but that ought to bring out the very best of us. We talk about, for my grandparents, being a part of the greatest generation, surviving COVID and coming out of it on the other side is going to require us to be the kindest generation. And if a worldwide health pandemic can't snap us out of this us versus them, then nothing can. So let's make sure something good comes out of what we are surviving right now, and that we're better people when we come out of it.
And Governor Walz.
Again, I'll associate myself with the remarks. I'm a geographer by training. My lieutenant governor and myself call ourselves census nerds. Everything depends on the census. The well-being of people depends on the census. How our states are funded depends on the census. And I think all of us know gerrymandering is the death of democracy. It undermines things. I served in Congress when we should have taken majorities and did not, simply because firewalls were put up on purpose. So they're making it hard for us, but we can help everybody fill out that census. Let's get this right. And I'm with each of these folks here. We just want a better country. We've got an important election coming up, but an election is a means to an end. That end is a fair, equitable country where everybody has a chance to succeed. That's what we're looking for. That's why it matters to get out and vote.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of these extraordinary governors, Governor Bell Edwards, who unfortunately couldn't join us, and on behalf of the viewers and constituents, not only of your states, but folks who really wish we had you as our leaders, thank you so much for what you do every day to make our country stronger, better, and kinder. Thank you all to everyone who's watching, and thank you to Governor Phil Murphy for letting me guide this conversation. Have a wonderful day.